So welcome, Daniela Bevilacqua, or Bevilacqua. Let's try and get this right. To the Keen on Yoga offering. Welcome, Daniela. Daniela is a research associate at the University of SOAS in London.
Hello, Adam. Nice
Hi.
to see you.
Nice to see you. We're just having this little chat. Actually, I have to mention it because it's kind of quite funny. You see, if you can watching on the video, you can see I hit my head yesterday, actually scrolling through, looking at Daniela on YouTube on my phone, and I was walking and I hit my head on a bar or something sticking out. So there's a nice cut on my head. But it's Daniela's fault because she was so riveting on YouTube. If you want to look at more of her stuff on YouTube, she's loads of stuff where she's really holding forth on the subject that we're going to talk to today, which is, I suppose, particularly the Hatha Yoga tradition, which she's recently completed a project with Jason Birch and Jim Mallinson and Mark Singleton, I believe, as well. So yeah. I think the four of you at SOAS, it was a Hatha Yoga project. I think it finished in 2020. It was a 5-year project. And I suppose my opening question is, this is really cutting edge stuff that you did there. And why do you think more research hasn't been done on Hatha Yoga so far? I mean, we're really opening out into a new world of scholarly research on modern yoga and modern Hatha Yoga. And this is really, Jim, we could say, is probably the first person or one of the first people to really start doing this stuff. So why is it only so recently, do you think, that we're encountering some, these texts that are talking about yoga and this scholarship?
Yeah, probably because before the attention was more focused on the philosophical side of yoga, while Hatha Yoga text focuses more on the, let's say, practical and physical practices. And, perhaps scholars thought that wasn't not that... I don't know how to say, because it's like, maybe it was a kind of secondary literature, not that interesting, because these textual sources are not even that challenging for scholars. No. They are quite simple and the contents can be repetitive. And so maybe if they were not even interested themselves, the scholars, in the practices, why to focus on them? And so what you see, the bigger changes, I think, is the fact that there are a lot of scholars / practitioners that are addressing these textual sources.
Right.
And so they have a different curiosity towards this kind of texts. And someone had to open the field. It's always like that. There must be a groundbreaking research to open the field. And Jim was able to do both, starting the philological side of it, and at the same time opening the ethnographic side of it. Of course, there have been also other scholars working with sadhus and so on, but focusing the attention on asana and Hatha Yoga and yoga, I think he was one of the first ones. Yes.
Yeah, it just strikes me that they're kind of comparing the text and the kind of critical perspective on the body of Vedic literature or Indian literature is it is a recent thing, and it's it's just kind of bizarre that so much is suddenly starting to come out. Where 20 years ago, I suppose, before Norman Soyman and Elizabeth de Michaelis, we had, we really had so little there. But I want to rewind slightly. And the obvious question to ask you at the start is, where and how did you get into all this? Because your background wasn't really as a practitioner, I think with Jim. Jim was kind of obsessed with Vajroli Mudra, and Jason was a practitioner. But you weren't. You do a bit of yoga, I think, but you weren't. Really, that wasn't really your approach, was it?
Yeah, exactly. No. I was more into the Sadhu Samaj and the Sadhu Society. And so, because I did my PhD on the Ramanandi Sampradaya, and Jim is involved with this order, this religious order. So when he was planning the Hatha Yoga project, he needed an ethnographer to do research with sadhus. And so he was looking around for someone who could do that. And since I did my PhD among sadhus, and it was like 40 years of PhD and field work, because I'm really much into field work, love spending time among sadhus. And so he asked me if I was interested in doing this postdoc research. And you can imagine, after a PhD, before finishing the PhD, I got this offer and I was like, I'm in.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
sure.
It was quite easy actually, because it was a very good opportunity for me to keep working among sadhus and also, deepening this knowledge about yoga, because as you said, I spent a lot of time in India, so I did yoga, I studied yoga, Ayurveda and all the stuff in Rishikesh, in Banaras, but very superficially, let's say, And so this was like, okay, let's put the two things together and let's see what comes out.
You mentioned that, and there's many articles you've written on the Ramanandi Sampradaya.
Yeah.
As you can see, like even with my pronunciation, I don't know the first thing about them. Could you explain like what attracts you to them and for the general public, I suppose, who they are?
Okay, yeah. I was attracted to the Ramanandi Sampradaya because of the importance of the Ram Bhakti in India, the devotion towards Ram in India. And this can be a bit political, because for my MA, I did research, a thesis on the Ram Janmabhoomi issues, the destruction of the Ayodhya, the Babri Masjid in Ayodhya. And so since this was a very important event in the history of Indian politics and society, I wanted to go to the root of that kind of movement, so the devotion towards Ram. And so I thought, like, okay, which kind of, what sampradaya is related to the Ram Bhakti, to the devotion towards Ram? And it's the Ramanandi Sampradaya, which is the largest, the Vaishnava order in northern India. And it's very much differentiated, because in this religious devotional group, you can find the three different branches. And so one is the Rasic, that is very devotional. One is the Tapasic, that is more connected with the practice of Hatha Yoga and austerities. And then there is the Naga section, the warriors, that you see in other sampradayas as well. And so I wanted to study more about this order, and especially, I have to be very sincere, I wanted to stay in Benares, because I wanted to stay more and learn more about this city. And in Benares, there is the Shrimat, that is one of the, nowadays, the main monastery of this sampradaya, which created in the 20th century the title, the charge, the office of Jagadguru Ramanandacharya. And so I try to recreate the history of this religious position in Benares. And then it's how I got involved with the sadhus and etc., etc., etc.
For people that don't know, what's a sampradaya?
A sampradaya sampradaya is a word that means tradition, and it's used today as a way to address religious group, religious orders. And what is important is that is related, and it contains paramparas. And these two aspects, the idea of sampradaya related to teachings, customs that are transmitted, is very important and very, I would say, unique in India, because you see these different sampradayas, and inside each sampradaya you have a lot of paramparas, a lot of lineages, and all these lineages can be very different from each other because they follow the transmission from guru to disciple, which makes like the lineage, the parampara. So you have different lineages. That means you have different paramparas, which means that perhaps you will have slightly different teachings that depends on the guru, because we have to stress the importance of the guru in the Indian traditions. So a guru can modify the teaching, because it's really, how you get the teaching from your guru, and then how you elaborate that teaching, and perhaps your own experiences is going to modify what you learned, and the way you transmit it then creates something unique. So it's like you transmit a teaching, perhaps an old teaching, but always innovating it. And this is, I think, what makes unique the traditions in India. Always alive.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you hadn't mentioned already, Daniela has spent enormous amounts of time we call it in the field, with sadhus at various melas at various festivals, and spending 6 months, generally a year, in India. Until recent times with COVID and all that stuff. just with a very difficult task, let's say, very potentially uncomfortable at least task of hanging out with these guys in kind of bizarre circumstances quite often, I'm sure. And really, I really just would love to have an hour of Daniela telling stories about, these experiences, really. It should be much more fun than trying to make this kind of intelligent, philosophical kind of episode. But I mean, I think we'll persevere anyway, a little bit, and then we'll try and get a couple of little anecdotes out of her in the end. But I mean, we see the Buddha mentions that he did some kind of yoga before, reaching his enlightenment, right? It's mentioned clearly that he was an ascetic, and he also tried yoga, and so this dates yoga at least 2,500 years old, right? But yet the texts, state we're finding texts stating and talking about yoga, Hatha yoga, from probably, when are we? Like maybe. You're probably better on the date.
11th century.
12th, or was it
11th?
Yeah. Okay. Right. Yeah. 11th, 12th century. So we're assuming, and when you're talking to the sadhus, that there's a tradition that's going way, way back before that, but it's simply oral. Is that correct?
Yeah, it is correct. But then we have to stress, like, what do you mean for yoga and what do you mean for Hatha yoga? That's the main point. So what was doing the Buddha?
Yeah.
What do you mean for yoga? This is my question to you, Adam. What do you mean for yoga? What do you mean when the Buddha was doing?
Well, it was a kind of segue into your famous article, really, on Let the Sadhus Talk, and what is yoga exactly? That was just priming you, really.
Okay, that's good for you. Yeah, I mean, the fact is that if we understood yoga as sadhus do, that basically is meditation, then of course we can say that ascetics were doing meditation since long time. But we have to always be clear that you see the word yoga appearing in the Katha Upanishad and not before.
Yeah.
No, so it's always a bit of a mistake to attribute to previous timings, practices, or method, because yoga is a method, that were not clearly called like that. But then the Buddha was doing also tapas. Right? Tapasya. He was basically doing austerities. And because of the austerities, he decided, okay, I will create my own middle path without, exerting my body and my mind in this kind of practices. So, there is this connection. I can say that this is something that I'm working on right now, the connection between Hatha Yoga and Tapas, because the two practices, the Tapasya and Hatha Yoga, how it is understood by sadhus and as it is described in vernacular sources is very much connected. And so it's, but as you said, it's strictly related to an oral transmission. So we don't have.
When we talk about tapas, just to clarify, tapas. Well, you define what tapas is. You're probably.
I would say that tapas. No, I'm not a Sanskrit. But tapas is a kind of inner spiritual heat that you produce by doing tapasya, austerities. It's like, for everything in this field, yoga is the method that helps you to reach yoga. And tapas is the inner heat that you have to produce through tapasya, austerities, to have more tapas. And the same is like for other practices, like, if you do dhyan to reach dhyan, different exercises to meditate to reach eventually that kind of latest meditation.
So tapas is like basically a penance, really. Right? Could we equate tapas to be like an old-fashioned penance, like we know in the Catholic Church?
Yes,
all those kneeling down and then kneeling your way to some pilgrimage site or whatever like that.
Yeah.
Right? Anything
that
kind of anything that makes you kind of uncomfortable, basically.
In some scholars call it like sacred pain, like the way you use the pain. Right. Yeah, sacred pain. The way you use like physical pain to overcome your body. Right? Because sometimes through pain, you can overcome the body and even like mental levels of reality. But we have to remember that, in the South Asian context, tapas can be associated to different practices, not only pain. Of course, it is something that has to be done in a very stubborn way. But even meditation, you can do it in a very stubborn way. Like, you meditate 10 hours a day. This is a form of tapasya because it's like you are meditating 10 hours a day. So it's the way you do an action that transforms it in a yes.
Yeah.
So everything can become a tapasya and can produce tapas eventually.
If it's done with a kind of, I mean, as James Mallinson says, a kind of bloody mindedness. He uses the English expression, which I love the term, and I think I've quoted it a number of times, a kind of bloody mindedness, which means in if you're not a native English speaker, a kind of stubbornness, like Daniela says, kind of, that kind of, blinkers,
exactly.
kind of, I'm going to do this, until, if it kills me, I'm going to do it, we say
exactly.
in English.
And this is also what sadhus think about Hatha Yoga. That is why the two has to be strictly related. I mean, there are some parts that are missing in these historical reconstructions. That is why scholars are are very well accepted in keep doing this research, because there are a lot of pieces in the puzzle that are missing, and especially related to the presence and the development and when Hatha Yoga was introduced, from which groups and so on. But I really think that this connection between Hatha and tapas has to be properly investigated.
Do you think Hatha Yoga is always tapas, though? Because if you look at, the Gita, I mean, it's very much framed at Hatha Yoga as being something which is comfortable, right? Like that you shouldn't do something which is pain, which is causing your body pain or pushing your body, right? That's actually a sacrilege. When Krishna says to Arjuna, if you punish the body, you're punishing me in the body. I mean, have you found that river, that theme within the sadhus as well? That if
there is also
doing something that should not be forceful.
Yeah, the fact is that since we can say that there are two understandings of tapas, a form of tapas that we can see more meditative, more moral, that is also related to your behaviors, and a form of tapas that is more physical and painful. So even in the sadhu society, we have these two different attitudes. Like if you put your body too much in that pain, that is useless, right? Because you are just causing pain to your body. So there are some sadhus that are very critical against, like, for example, the urdubahu. That means those sadhus who keep the arms up. Because they say, see, what are they doing? They are just ruining their body, right? So you can see both these kind of attitudes. Like people who condemn this kind of tapasya that eventually are going to really hurt your body. And there are those who instead consider this like a form of old yoga, like Prachin yoga. This is the ancient form of yoga.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's when you say hurt the body, that's an understatement. If you're, you were talking another one. If you're standing with your arm up, then really, I mean, your arm is finished. After a short period of time, that thing is like a withered kind of branch that doesn't belong to the body anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
I think you said in another podcast something like, I don't know. You go, I don't know whether after that time, like 20 years or something, whether they could ever get it back. And I was thinking, that's an understatement. They're never going to get that. You could do whatever you wanted, but you're never going to get that arm back.
Yeah. In fact, I mean, there is the second part of that story actually, because there was this very famous and very amazing urdubahu, again, the sadhu with the arm up, Amar Bharti, and with a friend of mine, we were checking his, the photograph of him when he was young, and then meeting him in the last Kumbh Mela, we could see that actually his arm was not that up as it was in the past. So eventually it was like a bit straight in front of him.
Right.
So we were thinking and wondering if he was doing some practices actually to bring it back. I mean, I don't know how, of course, but if you look at the photograph, like the earliest images of him and those like more recent, the arm was going down. I don't know if it is just because of the gravity. I'm not a physics, but you never know what he was doing. Maybe he had some kind of inner or some secret knowledge about this kind of procedure. Unfortunately, he died 2 years ago, so we will never know. Yeah.
Do you think maybe he was finished with it and he was gradually bringing it back somehow with some special sadhu kind of power?
I don't know, but the fact it is interesting because there is this report from Duncan in the 19th century where he met this Purnapuri. Maybe even Jim talked about this Purnapuri. I don't remember. Is a famous ancient like Urduba who was keeping both his arms up, and he said to two employees of the British Raj that his intention was to stop the tapasya after 12 years. So he declared that he was going to stop being an Urdubahu somehow. Yeah. He doesn't explain how, but there is the intention of finishing the tapasya is there. So we don't know if he was able eventually to bring the arms down. I mean, for me, it's quite impossible because if you look at the arms of these people, they're atrophied like 100%.
It's mind-boggling.